Alright, so a while back I made a video showing you how to get internal false colors on your Sony FX3, FX30, or any other Sony camera that shoots in S-Log3 and allows you to import your own LUTs. Long story short, I basically made a false color LUT that you can import into your camera and get that sort of functionality. And in that video, I talked about the fact that I actually made two versions of the false color LUT. One of them is meant to monitor false colors on a log image, while the other one is meant to monitor false colors on a Rec709 image. So I wanted to follow up on that video and talk about why I actually made two versions of the false color LUT, and I also want to try to give you a few examples of when it makes more sense to use one over the other. Alright, so in this first example, I just want to show you some of the differences in terms of what you're going to see whenever you're using either one of these two false color LUTs. And right now we're looking at a clean log image, and even though everything is really bright, I can tell that we're not clipping any information. And I know that because we're not seeing any zebras show up anywhere in the footage. For those of you who might not know, like false colors, zebras are another exposure tool that at a glance can give you some very useful information in terms of how you're exposing your image. And depending on how you set them up in your camera, you can have them show you stuff like when you're clipping your highlights, or you can also set them up to show you if you're exposing skin tones correctly. I personally prefer using zebras to show me when I'm clipping highlight information, which is why in my camera I've got them set to a lower limit of 94+. And the reason for that is because that is the level where S-Log3 starts clipping highlights. But the thing with zebras is that you can only have them enabled for one specific brightness value at a time, meaning that they're either only going to show you if you're clipping your highlights, or they're only going to show you how you're exposing your skin tones. On the other hand, false colors can give you a lot more information on screen at the same time. So like I said, everything in the footage right now is very bright, but nothing is clipping. So if I start increasing the exposure gradually, we're going to start seeing zebras show up in parts of the image. And this now means that we're losing all of that highlight information and we're not going to be able to bring it back later. So now if I enable my log false color LUT, you're going to see that those same spots in the image that had zebras are now bright red. Bright red means that we're clipping highlight information that can't be brought back later. Yellow means that we're almost clipping, but not just yet. And purple means that we're clipping shadow information, but for this example, we are just looking at highlights. So now that we know what the colors mean, if I start dropping the exposure of this image slowly, we're going to see that the red starts disappearing. And then when I turn off the LUT, we're going to see that there are no zebras anywhere on the footage again. And that means now we have our highlight information and we can do whatever we want with it. However, if I now go and turn on the false color LUT that is made to monitor false colors on Rec709, you're going to see that according to that, we're clipping again when we know that that's actually not the case. And the reason this happens is because Rec709 images are much more compressed and they retain a lot less dynamic range than a clean log image. So this is why in my video talking about these LUTs, I said that I think having two versions, one for log and one for Rec709, is better than just having it for one of them. And that's why most of the time whenever I'm recording, I prefer using false colors on a log image because that gives me an idea of what the sensor is capturing directly. However, there are certain situations when using false colors on Rec709 makes a little bit more sense, and I'm going to try to show you that in the next example. Okay, here's another example where we have both bright highlights as well as shadows. And in this scenario, I will start by looking at what the Rec709 false color LUT is showing us, which is that we are overexposed on the window and underexposed in the shadows. However, if I flip over to the log LUT, we don't see any of those colors showing over or underexposure, and same goes for zebras. They're not showing up on the window, so we're not clipping. So if I just care about protecting my highlights, using the log LUT is still the way to go. But if I want to protect my shadows, it's a bit of a different story. Because if I turn on the Rec709 false colors again, we see that there is a lot of purple in the shadows, meaning that they are too dark. Again, according to the log LUT, we're not clipping the shadows, but you have to remember, log captures much more information across the image. However, Rec709 is much closer to what your image will look like later when you start color grading. And while technically we still have all of that information in the shadows because we're shooting in log, when we try to bring out any of that information later, we're also going to be revealing a lot of noise. So in this case, false colors on Rec709 gives me a much better idea of when I both have information in the shadows to work with, but also when I'm actually able to keep the shadows cleaner. I could just open up my aperture as far as it'll go and then use the ISO if I need to get rid of the purple on the Rec709 false colors. But then I am starting to sacrifice highlight information because I am clipping everything in the window. And you can see that if I flip over to the log LUT. So ideally, a better way to make sure that I'm getting clean shadows while also not clipping my highlights is bringing in a light to give me extra exposure specifically in the shadows. And this is what that would look like. So now when we look at the false colors in log, the highlights are not clipped, which we can also see because there are no zebras showing up. And when we turn on the Rec709 false colors, it's going to show that the highlights are clipping a bit, which we already know isn't the case, so I'm not worried about that. But more importantly, we're not seeing as much purple in the dark areas, meaning that later when grading, I should be able to get cleaner shadows with less noise. And just to quickly give you an example of what I'm talking about with the shadows, this is the version of the clip that we were just looking at where false colors on Rec709 were telling us that we are clipping the shadows. As you can see, there's a lot of purple in the curtain here as well as some on the plant. And false colors are also telling us that we are blowing out the window, which we know is not the case because we checked that using the log false colors. So if I go ahead and I convert this clip into Rec709 using a Phantom LUT, it's obviously going to be a little bit dark. And if I wanted to, I could go ahead and I could increase the exposure of this clip by like 1 stop, and that's obviously going to brighten it up. But if we zoom in to the shadow areas that the false colors were telling us were clipped, you can see that we still have information in them, but there is also a lot of noise that's being brought out after the exposure adjustment. And now I can just go over to the other clip. This is the version of the clip where we brought in some light to fill in the shadows, and if we turn on Rec709 false colors, you're going to see that there is a lot less purple in the curtain and almost no purple anywhere on the plant. And if we go ahead and convert this into Rec709, again using a Phantom LUT, it's obviously going to be a lot brighter than the other clip. But now we can go ahead and adjust the exposure of this as well, and I'm just going to drop it by 1 stop. And now if I zoom in to the same area to look at the shadows, you're going to notice that they are a lot cleaner. And just to compare, here is the clip where we brought in the light, and here is the clip where we did not bring in the light, but we brought up the exposure in post. This one has a lot more noise in the shadows, whereas this one is much cleaner. And even after this exposure adjustment where we dropped the exposure so that this window isn't as bright as it was originally, if I want to, I can bring up some shadow detail in the curtains. And again, if we zoom in, you can see that they are still significantly cleaner than the other version of our clip that didn't have the light on the shadows. So this is the clip where false colors were telling us that we were clipping the shadows, and this is the clip where false colors were telling us that we had better exposure in the shadow areas. So like I said earlier, 95% of the time I prefer using false colors on a log image because it gives me an idea of what the sensor is capturing. But if I'm ever in a situation where I specifically know that I need to keep the shadows cleaner, I will choose to use the false colors on a Rec709 image instead. But honestly, a piece of advice that I can give you is to just use whichever false color LUT you feel like fits the current situation better. And then you can flip over to the other false color LUT just to double check that everything is looking the way it should be. All right, so I think that should be everything, but if you still have any questions, you can feel free to drop them in the comments and I will do my best to try and answer. But aside from that, thank you for watching and I will see you in the next one.